The Phantom Coach. The following is a true story. It happened to me in the year 1850. That was 20 years ago today. I have never told this story to anyone. I was hunting the bleak, wide moors of North England. It was the month of December. It was the end of the pheasant hunting season. The wind was due east, and I was lost. The first snowflakes of a snowstorm were fluttering down upon the heather. Evening was closing in around me. I was in trouble. I stared anxiously into the gathering darkness. Some 10 or 12 miles distant, the purple moor melted into a range of low hills. I could see no chimney fires. I could see no sheep tracks. I could see no fences. I had no other choice but to walk onward. I hoped by chance I would find some shelter. I shouldered my gun and pushed wearily forward. I had been walking since an hour after daybreak. I was terribly hungry. The snow had begun to fall, ominous and steady. The wind stopped. The cold became more intense. Night was rapidly appearing. My prospects darkened with the darkening sky. I was worried about my wife. I had left her at the inn this morning. She would be watching for me through the parlor window. The thought of her worrying for me all night long strained my heart. We had been married 4 months. We had spent autumn in the Highlands. Now we were lodging in a remote little village just on the edge of the great English moorlands. We were very much in love. We were very happy. This morning she had implored me to be back before dusk. I had promised her I would. I was very tired. I hoped that I could find shelter. I hoped that I could find something to eat. I thought with some rest and directions I could be back to our lodgings by midnight. The snow was falling and the night thickened. Every now and then I would stop and shout. My shouts only made the silence deeper. A vague sense of uneasiness came upon me. I remembered stories of travelers that had walked out onto the moors in the falling snow. Eventually, they lay down to rest and slept into death. I thought that it would be impossible to walk all night. I was sure there would come a time when my limbs would fail me, when I too would lie down and fall into a deadly sleep. I felt death's icy claws. I shuddered. What a shame it would be to die now, when life lay before me so bright and inviting. To banish these terrible thoughts, I shouted again into the darkness. I listened eagerly. Was it my imagination, or did I hear something? I shouted again, and the echo followed. Then a wavering speck of light came suddenly out of the dark. It shifted. It disappeared. Then it grew momentarily nearer and brighter. I ran towards it at full speed. To my great joy, I found myself face to face with an old man. He had a lantern. The exclamation, "Thank God!" burst involuntarily from my lips. The old man blinked and frowned. He lifted his lantern. He peered into my face. He paused, then growled, "What for?" "Well, for you," I answered. "I was sure I was going to be lost in the snow." The old man said, "Well, folks do get lost out here from time to time. And what is stopping you from being lost if it is the Lord's will?" I replied, "If it is the Lord's will that we are to be lost together, my friend, we must submit. But I don't mean to be lost without you. How far am I now from the village?" "A good 20 miles or more," said the old man. "And where do you live?" I asked. He looked at me closely. He jerked the lantern vaguely. "That way," he said. "I presume you are going home?" I asked. "Maybe I am," he replied briskly. "Then I am going with you," I said firmly. The old man shook his head. He rubbed his nose reflectively with the handle of the lantern. "It's no use. He won't let you in. Not him," said the old man. "We'll see about that," I replied briskly. "May I ask who you are referring to?" "The master," And who is the master?" "That's not important to you," was the unceremonious reply. "Well," I said, "you lead the way. I'm sure the master will give me shelter and supper tonight." "You can try," muttered my reluctant guide. He shook his head. He hobbled away, gnome-like, through the falling snow. I followed. Presently a large mass loomed up out of the darkness. A huge dog rushed out. It barked furiously. I asked, "Is this the house?" "Yes, it's the house," he shouted at the dog. "Down, boy!" He fumbled in his pocket for a key. I was close behind him. I did not want to lose my chance of entering. The lantern shed a little circle of light. I saw that the door was heavily studded with iron nails. It was like the door of a prison. In another minute he had turned the key. I pushed past him into the house. Once I was inside, I looked around with curiosity. I found myself in a great raftered hall. It served a variety of uses. One end was like a barn. It was piled high to the roof with corn. The other end stored flour sacks, agricultural equipment, casks, and miscellaneous lumber. From the beams overhead hung rows of hams. From the corners hung bunches of dried herbs for winter use. In the center of the floor stood some huge object. It was covered in a dingy wrapping cloth. It reached halfway up to the rafters. I lifted a corner of the cloth. To my surprise, I saw a telescope of very considerable size. It was mounted on a rude, movable platform. The platform had 4 wheels. The tube was made of painted wood. It was bound round with bands of metal rudely fashioned. The light was dim, and it was hard to see under the cover. I estimated the lens to be at least 15 inches in diameter. I examined the instrument. I asked myself if it was not the work of a self-taught astronomer. Suddenly a bell rang sharply. "That is for you," said my guide with a malicious grin. He pointed to a low black door. "That is his room." It was on the opposite side of the hall. I crossed over the hall. I rapped somewhat loudly on the door. I did not wait for an invitation. I went in. A huge, white-haired old man rose from a table. The table was covered with books and papers. The old man confronted me sternly.
"Who are you?"
he said.
"How did you come here, and what do you want?"
"James Murray, I'm a barrister. I came on foot across the moor. I became lost while hunting. I want meat, drink, and sleep." The old man bent his bushy brows into a portentous frown.
"My house is not a hotel,"
he said haughtily.
"Jacob, how dare you admit this stranger?"
The doorman grumbled.
"I did not admit him,"
said the old man.
"He followed me over the moor. He pushed his way into the house. I'm no match for his 6'2" height."
The old man at the table stared at me.
"And pray, sir, by what right have you forced an entrance into my house?"
I straightened. "The same right by which I would have clung to your boat if I were drowning. The right of self-preservation."
"Self-preservation?"
exclaimed the man at the table. "There is an inch of snow on the ground already," I replied. "It would be deep enough to have covered my body before daybreak." The man strode to the window. He pulled aside a heavy black curtain. He looked out.
"It is true,"
he said.
"You can stay if you choose until morning."
Then he said,
"Jacob, serve the supper."
He waved me to a seat. He resumed his eating. He became at once again absorbed in his studies from which I had disturbed him. I placed my gun in the corner. I drew my chair to the hearth. I examined my quarters at leisure. This room was smaller than the hall. It contained just as many curious objects. The floor had no carpet. The walls were whitewashed. They were, in parts, scrawled over with strange diagrams. Other parts were covered with shelves, crowded with strange instruments. On one side of the fireplace stood a bookcase. It was filled with dingy folios. On the other side of the fireplace stood a small organ. It was fantastically decorated. It had painted carvings of medieval saints and devils. There was a cupboard at the far end of the room. Through a half-open door, I saw a long array of geological specimens. There were also surgical instruments, crucibles, and jars of chemicals. On the fireplace beside me was a mantel. On it stood a model of the solar system, a small galvanic battery, and a microscope. Every chair had its burden. Every corner was heaped high with books. The floor was littered with maps, papers, and tracings. I stared about me in amazement. My astonishment increased with every fresh object my eyes chanced to rest upon. I have never seen such a strange room. It was even more strange to find it in a lonely farmhouse on a wild and solitary moor. I looked again and again from my host to the surroundings. I asked myself who and what could he be? He was a striking figure. His head was more that of a poet than a philosopher. He had broad temples. He had a low brow over his eyes. He had wild, perfectly white hair. It was rugged like that of Beethoven. There were deep lines around his mouth. There were stern furrows in his brow. He wore a concentrated expression. As I watched him, the door opened, and Jacob brought supper. His master closed his book and rose. Newly courteous, he invited me to the table. Ham, eggs, and a loaf of brown bread were placed before me. A bottle of admirable sherry was the centerpiece.
I have but the most basic farmhouse fare to offer you, sir, but I am sure your appetite will make up for the deficiencies of our table,
said my host. Before he had finished speaking, I had already started to devour the food. As a starving sportsman, I replied that I had never had anything so delicious. He bowed stiffly. He sat down to his own primitive supper. He ate only a jug of milk and a bowl of porridge. We ate in silence. When he had finished, Jacob removed the trays. I then drew my chair back to the fireside. To my surprise, my host did the same. He turned abruptly to me. He said,
"Sir, I have been retired here for 23 years. During that time, I have not seen as many strange faces. I have not read a single newspaper. You are the first visitor in more than 4 years. Could you tell me about the outer world?"
I replied, "With pleasure, sir. Please ask any question you would like. I am at your service." He nodded his head in acknowledgement. He leaned forward. He rested his elbows on his knees. His chin was supported in the palm of his hands. He stared fixedly into the fire. He proceeded to question me. He asked me questions about science. He was not interested in the practical purposes of life. I am not a student of science. I answered as best I could. I was relieved when he stopped asking questions and offered his own observations. I listened, spellbound. He almost forgot my presence. I had never heard anything like it. I have never heard anything like it since then. He was familiar with all systems of philosophy. He was bold in generalization. He was subtle in analysis. His thoughts were as an uninterrupted stream. He leaned forward in the same moody attitude as before. His eyes were always fixed on the fire. He wandered from topic to topic. He went from speculation to speculation. He was like an inspired dreamer. He went from practical science to mental philosophy. He discussed electricity in wires and electricity in the nerves. He discussed Watt and Mesmer, Spinoza and Descartes, Aristotle and Plato, the Magi and the mystics of the East. Even bewildering ideas were harmoniously connected. It was like sequences of music from his lips. Eventually, he passed into subjects that philosophy and science cannot reach. He spoke of the soul and its aspirations. He spoke of the spirit and its powers. He spoke of second sight and prophecy. Phenomena such as ghosts, specters, and supernatural appearances. Such things that have been denied by skeptics, but which are embraced by open minds.
"The world," he said, "grows daily more skeptical of all that lies beyond its own narrow radius. Our men of science foster a fatal tendency. They condemn as fable all that resists experiment. They reject all that cannot pass the test of scientific analysis. Why have they for so long held apparitions as superstition? And why for so long has that superstition held a place in the minds of men? Show me any fact in physics, in history, in archaeology that has had so much testimony. From all races of men, from all ages, from the sages of antiquity to the savages of today. The Christian, the pagan, the materialist all mention it. Do so many eyewitness accounts count for nothing? But this phenomenon is treated as a nursery tale by the philosophers of our century. He who believes is a dreamer or a fool." He spoke with bitterness. He lapsed for some minutes into silence. Then he raised his head from his hands. With a soft voice, he said, "I was not afraid to state my convictions to the world. I, too, was branded as a visionary. I was held to ridicule by my contemporaries. I was ejected from the field of science, a field in which I had labored with honor during all the best years of my life. It was only 23 years ago, and now the world has forgotten me, as I have forgotten the world. That is my history." "It is a very sad one," I murmured. "It is not uncommon," he replied. "I suffered for the truth as many a better man than me has suffered before." He rose, as if he wanted to end the conversation. He went to the window. "It has stopped snowing," he said. "Stopped?" I exclaimed. I stood up eagerly. "I would like to get back to my hotel, but it is hopeless. I could get lost on the moor, nor could I possibly walk 20 miles tonight." "Walk 20 miles tonight?" repeated my host. "Why would you do that?" "I would like to get back to my wife. She does not know I have lost my way. She is at this moment breaking her heart with suspense and terror." My host asked, "Where is she?" I replied, "At the village 20 miles away." He echoed thoughtfully, "The South Village. Are you so very anxious to make it back to your wife tonight?" "I'm very anxious," I said. "I would give £20 for a guide and a horse." "Your wish can be answered at a less costly rate," he said, smiling. "The night mail from the north changes horses at the South Village. It passes within 5 miles of this spot. There is a crossroads there. It is due in about an hour and a half. Jacob can guide you across the moor. He can put you on the old coach road. You will be able to find your way to the new road?" "Easily," I replied. "Gladly I would." He smiled again and rang the bell. He gave the old servant his instructions. He took a bottle of whiskey from the cupboard and said, "A glass of courage before you start?" I would have declined, but he pressed it on me. I drank. It went down my throat like liquid flame. It almost took my breath away. "It's strong," he said, "but it will help to keep out the cold. And now you have no time to spare. Good night." I thanked him for his hospitality. I wanted to shake his hand, but he had turned away before I could finish my sentence. I traversed the hall immediately. Jacob locked the outer door behind me. We were out in the wide, white moor. The wind had fallen, but it was bitterly cold. Not a star glimmered in the black vault overhead. The only sound was the rapid crunching of the snow beneath our feet. It disturbed the heavy stillness of the night. Jacob was not happy to be out in the cold. He shambled on in sullen silence. His lantern cast his shadow at his feet. I followed with my gun over my shoulder. We did not speak. I thought of my host. His voice rang in my ears. His eloquence held my imagination captive. I remember to this day how my overexcited brain retained whole sentences of his discourse. I remembered the brilliant images. I remembered the splendid fragments of crystal reasoning. I remembered his words exactly. I walked behind my guide.
I was absorbed in thought and unobservant. Suddenly, Jacob came to a halt.
"There is your road,"
he said.
"Keep the stone fence to your right hand. You can't miss it."
"This is the old coach road?" I asked.
"This is the old coach road," he replied.
"How far do I go on it?"
"About 3 miles,"
said Jacob. I pulled out my wallet. He became more talkative.
"The old road is good for walking, but it was too steep and narrow for northern carriage traffic. Be careful where the side has collapsed. It's near the signpost. It was never fixed, even after the accident."
"What accident?" I asked.
"The night mail drove off the edge. It fell all the way to the valley below, a 50-foot fall."
"How terrible," I answered. "Were any lives lost?"
"All of them. 4 were found dead. The other 2 died the next morning,"
said the old man ominously. "How long ago did it happen?"
"Only 9 years ago,"
said Jacob. "Near the signpost, you say? I will keep that in mind. Good night."
"Good night, sir. Thank you for the £1."
Jacob touched his cap. He turned and trudged back the way we came. I watched the light of his lantern disappear. I turned to continue my journey alone. It was not difficult. Despite the dead darkness, I could see the old stone fence. It was gleaming in the fresh snow. It was very silent now. I could hear only my footsteps. All was solitary and silent. A strange sense of loneliness stole over me. I walked faster. I hummed a tune. I did sums in my head. I tried to forget the startling speculations that I had been listening to. The night air became colder and colder. I walked faster. Still, I found it impossible to keep warm. My feet were like ice. I lost sensation in my hands. I grasped my gun mechanically. I even found it difficult to breathe. This was an easy walk across flat moor, but I felt as though I was scaling to the peak of an alpine mountain. I became so distressed that I was forced to stop for a few minutes. I leaned against the stone fence. As I did so, I looked back up the road. There, to my relief, was a distant point of light. It was the gleam of an approaching lantern. At first, I concluded that Jacob had retraced his steps, but then a second light flashed into sight, parallel with the first and approaching at the same speed. I knew it was the carriage lamps of a private vehicle. It seemed strange to me that a private vehicle would be on so dangerous a road. The lamps grew larger and brighter. I could already see the dark outline of the carriage. It was coming very fast. The snow was nearly a foot deep under the wheels, so the carriage traveled noiselessly. It looked strangely lofty. A sudden suspicion flashed upon me. Was it possible that I had passed the crossroad in the dark? Had I missed the signpost? Could this be the coach I was supposed to meet? I did not have time to ask any more questions. The coach came round the bend. 4 grey horses steamed. On the coach were the driver, a guard, and an outside passenger. They were all wrapped in a soft haze of light from the blazing lamps. I jumped forward and waved my hat and shouted. It went past at full speed and past me. I feared I had not been seen or heard, but it was only for a moment. The coachman pulled up. He made no effort to dismount. He did not even turn his head. The guard was covered in capes and comforters. He was apparently sound asleep. The outside passenger did not even turn his head. I opened the door and looked in. There were 3 travelers inside. I stepped in and shut the door. I slipped into the vacant corner. I was pleased with myself. The coach felt colder than the outside air. It had a damp and disagreeable smell. I looked at my fellow passengers. They were all men. They were all silent. Each leaned back in his corner. Each were absorbed in their own reflections. I attempted to open a conversation. "How very cold it is tonight," I said, addressing my opposite neighbor. He lifted his head but made no reply.
"Winter is definitely here," I added.
He sat motionless in a dim corner. His eyes were turned full upon me, but he never said a word. I should have been annoyed, but I felt ill. The icy cold of the night had given me a chill. The strange smell inside the coach made me nauseous. I shivered from head to foot. I turned to my left-hand neighbor. I asked if he could open a window. He did not move. He did not speak. I repeated the question louder. Then I lost patience. I reached over and pulled the sash down. As I did so, the leather strap broke in my hand. I observed the glass was covered with a thick coat of mildew that must have taken years to accumulate. I examined the coach more closely. It was dilapidated. Every part of it was in a state of decay. The sashes splintered at a touch. The leather fittings were crusted over with mold. They were rotting from the woodwork. The floor was almost breaking away under my feet. The whole thing was foul with damp. I assumed it had been dragged out of some dank garage to do another day of work. I turned toward the third passenger. "This coach," I said, "is in a deplorable condition. I suppose the regular mail coach is being repaired?" He moved his head slowly. He looked me in the face without speaking. I shall never forget that look. My heart turned cold. His face was livid as the face of a corpse. His bloodless lips were drawn back in the agony of death. Between his lips showed gleaming white teeth. What I was going to say died on my lips. A dreadful horror came upon me. By this time my sight had become used to the gloom. I could see tolerably well. I turned to my opposite neighbor. He was also looking at me. He had the same pallor in his face. He had the same stony glitter in his eyes. I wiped my hand across my brow. I turned to the passenger beside my own seat. I saw that he was no living man. I saw that none of them were living men like myself. A pale phosphorescent light of putrefaction played upon their awful faces. Their hair was dank with the dews of the grave. Their clothes were earth-stained and dropping to pieces. Their hands were the hands of corpses long buried. Only their terrible eyes were living. Those eyes were all turned menacingly upon me. I let out a shriek of terror. I cried for help and mercy. I flung myself against the door and struggled in vain to open it. That single instant was as brief and vivid as a flash of summer lightning. The moon shone down through a rift in the stormy clouds. The ghastly signpost reared its warning finger by the roadside. I saw the collapsed roadside. I saw the plunging horses and the black gulf below. Then the coach reeled like a ship at sea. Then came a mighty crash, a sense of crushing pain, and then darkness. It seemed as if years had gone by. I awoke from a deep sleep one morning. I found my wife watching by my bedside. Tears of joy were in her eyes. This is the story she told me. I had fallen over a precipice, close to the junction of the old road. I had been saved from certain death by landing on a snowdrift at the foot of the cliff. I was discovered by 2 shepherds at daybreak. They carried me to the nearest shelter and summoned a doctor. The doctor found me in a state of raving delirium. I had a broken arm and a compound fracture of the skull. The letters in my wallet showed my name and address. My wife was summoned to nurse me. Thanks to youth and a fine constitution, I came out of danger at last. The place of my fall was precisely that at which the frightful accident had happened to the North Mail 9 years before. I never told my wife the fearful events which I have just described to you. I told the doctor who attended me. He treated the whole adventure as a mere dream, as a fever born of the brain. We discussed the question over and over again. Eventually, we could discuss it no longer without losing our tempers. Then we dropped it. You may form what conclusion you please, but I know that 20 years ago, I was the fourth passenger on that phantom coach.